Genesis 12 opens with God calling the 75-year-old Abram out from his country to a land that God would show him. Abram was the called out one. Jesus said in Matthew 16 verse 18, "On this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it." The word Jesus used here for church is the Greek word ekklesia, which means called out once, not twice, just once. Hence, Abram was a picture of the church. The rock refers to the confession that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. It brings to mind how Israel will later be called out of Egypt to enter the promised land of Canaan. Today, God has called believers out of the world into the kingdom of His love. In Genesis 12 verse 1, we see how God began to alter faith in Abram with the promise of rest as typified by the piece of landed property. It pointed to the promised land of Canaan, which was a shadow of the real sabbatical rest. That rest is found in the efficacious work of redemption by Jesus Christ and Him crucified. God has declared the end from the beginning. He started with the end in mind. Hebrews 4 verse 10 speaks of the rest to be found in Jesus. That rest is explained by Hebrews 10 verses 11 to 14. Jesus sat down after having perfectly cleansed sinners with the all-sufficient sacrifice of Himself after lunch. This is also substantiated by Luke 9:58 and John 19:30. The words lay and bow in those verses are the same Greek word klino, which means rest. It is in the rest Jesus died to give us that we find grace, the unearned, unmerited, and undeserved favors of God. This truth was painted in Genesis 6 verse 8, where it is stated that Noah, which means rest in the Hebrew, found grace. We can rest because Christ crucified has finished the work of redemption. Sudah habis. Jesus is grace personified because John 1 verse 17 says that grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. It was on the cross that Jesus found His resting place. Jesus found rest in saving us. We find our rest in the salvation that was wrought by Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Hence, the divine persuasion process first began with Jesus, in whom is found rest for our souls. Hebrews 12:2 says that Jesus is the author and perfecter of faith. He is faith personified. Jesus said, "Done." Dun, 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 dun. The law says, "Do." Do, 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 do. God said in Deuteronomy 30 verses 15 and 19, "See, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil. Therefore, choose life." The Apostle Paul said in 2 Corinthians 3 verse 7 that the Lord is the ministry of death. Jesus said in John 10 verse 10 that He has come to give us abundant life. So, what's your pick? In Genesis 15, God showed Abram a visual representation of the gospel of Jesus Christ by asking Abram to count or number the stars. It was the gospel in the stars, as was mentioned earlier. It is pertinent to note that God has already decided to name His beloved Son in human form as Jesus. This is evident from Matthew 1 verse 21. In other words, redemption was already in God's mind. Abram was being persuaded and convinced by the visual representation of God's love. The love of God for him began to take root in his heart. In other words, God's love was taking shape in the spirit of Abram. This is also what happens to us on regeneration. We have the love of God for us being revived in the deepest recess of our being. It is recorded in Genesis 15:6 that Abram believed in the Lord Yahweh, Jesus, and God accounted it to Abram for righteousness. Nobody was righteous before the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. The word accounted in Genesis 15 verse 6 refers to a forecast, a pointing forward to a future event. I read the verse to mean that Abram would be included as part of all those who would receive the gift of righteousness by the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. Righteousness is a love gift from God. It means we have been reconciled to God as His beloved children, our proper and right standing before God. God the loving Father has never disowned us. We disowned Him because we had believed in the lie that God does not love us. However, the moment we see God's love for us, that is in Jesus Christ and Him crucified, we shall know the truth, and the lie of the devil is debunked. Abram trusted in the future resurrection of Jesus to make him righteous, to reconcile him to God as his beloved child. The depth of Abram's love for Isaac was but a mere fraction of God's love for Abram, vis-a-vis you and I. Abram's willingness to sacrifice Isaac pointed to how willing God was to sacrifice Jesus, as well as Jesus' own willingness and joy to lay down his life for us. It pointed forward to 2 Corinthians 5 verse 21. Hence, Abram was the first to believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ. For this reason, he is called the father of all who believe in the gospel of Jesus. As stated in Galatians 3 verse 9, we are blessed along with Abram in that same faith. We have been persuaded by God in the same way.